Since the requirement for a national state of disaster to be declared in terms of the Disaster Management Act are no longer met, Cabinet has decided to terminate the national state of disaster with effect from midnight tonight. The Disaster Management Act provides that certain elements of the regulations may remain in place for a limited period for post-disaster recovery and rehabilitation. Accordingly, certain transitional provisions will remain in place for a period of 30 days after the termination of the national state of disaster to ensure essential public health precautions and other necessary services are not interrupted while the new regulations in terms of the National Health Act come into effect. What this means is that all regulations and directions made in terms of the Disaster Management Act following the declaration of the national state of disaster in response to COVID-19 are repealed, meaning done away with effect from midnight tonight, with the exception of a few transitional measures. These transitional measures, which will automatically lapse after 30 days, are the following. Firstly, we will still be required to wear a face mask in an indoor public space. This is necessary to prevent transmission in high-risk places, especially while many people remain unvaccinated. A mask is not required when outdoors. Secondly, the existing restrictions on gatherings will continue as a transitional measure. This means that both indoor and outdoor venues can take up to 50% of their capacity without any maximum limit, provided that proof of vaccination or a COVID test not older than 72 hours is required for entrance to the venue. Where there is no provision for proof of vaccination or a COVID test, then the current upper limit of 1,000 people indoors and 2,000 people outdoors will remain. Thirdly, the existing provisions with respect to international travel remain in place. This means that travelers entering South Africa will need to show proof of vaccination or a negative PCR test not older than 72 hours. If a traveler does not submit a vaccine certificate or proof of a negative COVID-19 test, they will be required to do an antigen test on arrival. If they test positive for COVID-19, they will need to isolate for 10 days. Fourthly, the directions that provide for the payment of the special 350 Rand Social Relief of Disaster Grant will remain in place. This will enable the Department of Social Development to finalize the regulations that will allow the payment of the grant to continue. Fifthly, directions that provide for the extension of the validity of a learner's license, driving license card, professional driving permit, and registration of a motor vehicle will remain in place. All other disaster regulations will fall away at midnight tonight. These include regulations on isolation of persons, on schools and access to old age homes, on public transport, on initiation practices, on cargo transportation, and on criminalization of non-adherence to these rules. The end of the national state of disaster also means that the coronavirus alert levels will no longer apply. There is one last measure that will outlive or remain and outlive the national state of disaster. This is the COVID-19 Vaccine Injury No-Fault Compensation Scheme. This scheme was brought into force in April last year to provide quick and easy access to compensation to any person who, after being vaccinated, suffers serious injury because of receiving a COVID-19 vaccine. The scheme will only be terminated once it has achieved its purpose.